Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of TRD Talks Live. Tonight, we have a very special edition for you. We're going to take all of you into our newsroom and talk about, virtually into our newsroom, and talk about all the sort of discussions that happen about some of the stories that we do. So we're going to talk to some of the reporters and how some of these stories came to be. But before we start the discussion, I have to plead with you, if you find value in what we provide, if you find value in the content that we provide, please go to therealdeal.com and subscribe for our paywall. Support us so we can continue to support you with the kind of content that we provide. So this is I'm very excited about this because I get to talk to the reporters, and I haven't been in a room like this with them, virtually or otherwise. And there was a lot of great news that came out in the last week, and I want to start off with Kevin. Kevin, you did an amazing story about the developer of Century City in Los Angeles. And for those of you who don't know about Century City was basically the Hudson Yards version of Los Angeles about a decade ago. I don't know how long ago. Kevin can fill us in on that. But there was some scandal that happened with the developer of Century City. Tell us about that story.
Right, sure. So first a bit about sort of how I came across this story. As part of my work lately, I've just been mining lawsuits on a regular basis. And with everything that's going on with coronavirus and whatnot, there have been some interesting lawsuits that come across our radars.
As a trend, whenever the market is up, the stories tend to be positive. And then when the market goes down, we notice a lot more lawsuits. We notice a lot more sort of, the bad stuff rises to the top and becomes visible. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this lawsuit that was filed in Los Angeles Superior Court a week ago was, it was just like, I don't cover Los Angeles a lot, but this was just, to me, the most Los Angeles story I could imagine. Really, it had a bit of everything, like a trustee at USC who founded their dance school, like this condo developer, like this big $100 million estate out in Beverly Hills. And somehow the allegations were just amazing. I can't take sides in this lawsuit, I don't think, but just if the things that are written in that lawsuit are true, they're absolutely amazing. Basically the allegation.
The thing with lawsuits is that people can sue anybody for anything, right? So they sometimes read like a novel, and they're amazing stuff that people put in a lawsuit. And sometimes people put those really salacious stuff in there. So news organizations pick it up, and we have to be, obviously we're very careful
exactly.
to we're not being used. But go ahead, continue.
Right. So this, from the looks of it, seems to be the culmination of a business dispute that's been going on for a little while, for at least a couple months, basically so to just set the scene first, I guess the plaintiff here her name is Gloria Kaufman. She's the widow of, I believe his name is Douglas Kaufman, who was one of the co-founders of KB Home back in the 80s, I believe. And anyways, she's a lifetime trustee on the board of trustees at USC. She founded their dance school. And she alleges that over the past decade, essentially, she had somehow been misled into making several real estate investments totaling tens of millions of dollars, and also guaranteeing these real estate loans totaling more than $100 million without her own knowledge.
How old is she?
The lawsuit just says that at all relevant times to this lawsuit, she was more than 80 years old. It doesn't really say what her age was. And one of the charges in the lawsuit is elder abuse, sort of because of the age of the plaintiff. And the defendants are, the more notable defendant is the developer, the principal, the CEO and founder of Woodridge Capital Partners. His name is Michael Rosenfeld. He's developing the Century Plaza project out in Century City, which is 2 condo towers, something like 200 some units, and a hotel, I think, at the base, and some retail. And it's basically the first big luxury condo project that's been built in that area.
Has he responded to the lawsuit at all?
He spoke with us. He spoke with me yesterday on the phone to basically vigorously deny everything that's said in the lawsuit. And the other defendant also, there's another guy involved whose name is Harvey Bookstein, who is an accountant at a firm whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, who basically Rosenfeld and Bookstein together were close friends of Mrs. Kaufman for the past 10 years, held themselves out as financial advisors, investment advisors, and close friends. And allegedly, and these allegations are wild, just like would persuade her to make all these investment in real estate projects that were supposedly safe and conservative, but were in fact high risk and self-dealing. And I don't know what to make of these allegations, but she just says she would sign things without looking at them.
Right. So doesn't she have somebody with that much in assets? Doesn't she have people around her to sort of protect her against, being used like that?
Rosenfeld says that Mrs. Kaufman, in fact, did have a lot of advisors, and she would always insist on going through the documents in great detail to understand what these investments were, and is now just somehow claiming to have no memory of having entered these investments. So it's a very interesting sort of the claims on both sides don't really line up. It's a bit unclear who to believe here.
What's next for that story? What do you got going on next?
Well, part of it's just going to be watching how the lawsuit evolves. There's been, Rosenfeld has filed like a breach of contract action against Mrs. Kaufman. And so basically some of the investments that Mrs. Kaufman was allegedly misled into, one of them was like guaranteeing a loan on this big condo project, Century Plaza, and also apparently buying an entire floor of condos in one of the towers at an inflated price or something. All allegations, all quite...
How did she come to be so wealthy?
How did she come to be so wealthy? I think it's, from her and her late husband's role in founding KB Home, a big home building company back in the day. I think the husband died in a plane crash in the late 80s, I think, according to the lawsuit. Right. But she has just, that generated quite a fortune. Mm-hmm.
Does she have a family? Does she have kids and grandkids who are,
I believe she has, one child. I've been doing some research who worked in journalism for a while.
I'm always curious, when people are in those situations where they're signing away tens of millions of dollars, how it's possible to not read every single word of a document, or not have people who are doing that stuff.
Right, exactly.
Those are really the people who should be responsible,
Exactly. This does make the allegations seem quite remarkable. And another deal that Mrs. Kaufman was allegedly misled into was this big estate in Beverly Hills, the Hearst estate, which is currently owned by a real estate investor who goes by the name of Leonard Ross. We've done a few stories about this property in recent months because he defaulted on a loan that was guaranteed by Mrs. Kaufman, and the loan was made out by Fortress, and there's been a number of lawsuits that have popped up late last year that that Mrs. Kaufman is also entangled in. So
you should try to get an interview with Mrs. Kaufman or her. Someone. All right. Thank you, Kevin. That was good. I love a good LA story with all the dramatic characters. Rich Bachman, you had a couple of scoops this week. JLL's Capital Markets laid off some people, and of course, the Rubin brothers coming into New York and being excited about retail. Why don't we start with the JLL scoops that you had about some of the layoffs that they have at JLL?
So on Monday, I was told that last Friday, a week from today, JLL laid off about 30 people in their New York capital markets group. So that's sales brokers and debt and equity. And what I've learned after is that most of the brokers were junior brokers who I believe were JLL legacy brokers. So JLL's capital markets division went through this merger when they acquired HFF last year. Right. And there was... with all these companies, there's some shakeout and some redundancy. So I think that this was both a combination of cost-cutting measures and some more fallout from the merger.
Do you feel like some of these companies are using the situation right now to sort of clean house and upgrade in some ways?
I have heard that. I've heard some people who say that they're making cuts. They're sort of trimming fat that they were looking to in the first place. It seems like JLL and the larger commercial firms have been able to hold off from layoffs for a while now. In the very early weeks of the economic shutdown, we saw a lot of the big residential brokerages do furloughs, layoffs, and cutbacks. Then it was some of these smaller commercial firms that are more specialized that focus on sales or leasing. The larger full-service firms say that because they're well-diversified, because a lot of their income comes from property management, which is a continuous stream, that they're more insulated from this. But I think that we're starting to see some of the cracks there. We saw earlier this week, Eastdil is going to lay off some staff members across the globe. They're a bit different. They work primarily on a salary and bonus pay scale, as opposed to...
It's not a project-based or a deal-based sort of, that's not how they get paid. They get a salary and the bonus at the end of the year, which from what I understand is completely at the discretion of, I forget the gentleman's name, the guy with the bolo tie. Who's the CEO of Eastdil? Roy March, right. So it's completely at the discretion of Roy March of what their bonus is, but apparently he seems to be a fair guy. So,
I think I'd heard that HFF had some sort of similar arrangement, and I'm not sure if it carried over when they came under the JLL umbrella, but there's a bit of a different overhead there.
Yeah, and then what was the size of the team where they cut 30 people? I mean, what's left of the team now?
I'm not quite sure, but this is the capital markets group that started growing when Bob Knackel went there from Cushman.
Yeah.
So that was sort of what we call the JLL legacy side now, but I know that he built up a sizable group there.
Bob Knackel's team is, they're still there, obviously?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, good.
I know that Bob is there. I'm not sure the exact people who got cut, but I will tell you, anytime I write a story about layoffs at commercial brokerages, representatives from the competitors ask me if I know who the names are, because they say they want to reach out to them to try to hire them.
Well, that's interesting. And then, so we have, at a time when nobody seems to be interested in retail or buying any significant assets, you got the Reuben brothers from London who come to New York and I guess other cities across the country, but they've been purchasing some stuff and they've made it clear that they're interested in purchasing more stuff. Tell us about who they are. I personally, this was the first time I heard of them when we did the story.
The Reuben brothers are, I believe, the UK's second wealthiest family. They're self-made billionaires. They made their money, I believe, in maybe it's like aluminum mines in Russia, post-Soviet Union. They parlayed that into property.
Sounds kosher.
What?
Says it sounds kosher.
I forget who's the guy on the Crown building with Schvo?
Vlad Dronin.
Yeah. Maybe it was Dronin they had done with it. Maybe I'm mixing him up with another Russian billionaire, but they had come up with some household names that we'll know. So they've been here in New York. They had previously held some of the debt on the Plaza Hotel, and they were in there with the Indian investor who was Subrata Roy, who was in prison, and they were trying to force him out of the sale. So they've been here for a while. And SL Green, before the pandemic hit, had this condo on Fifth Avenue. It's leased to Puma. They had put it on the market. The Reuben brothers came in and they snapped it up for $170 million, I think.
Right.
Which we don't know what the original ask was, but I think that we can assume they bought it at a discount. And I've been told that they're aggressively looking to both lend and buy in the market now, thinking that they can get big.
So they're looking at this as an opportunity. They're looking at this whole thing as a window of opportunity to come in and do good-sized deals.
Yep.
And have you been in touch with them?
No, I reached out, but I haven't. I got to decline to comment. That's if you consider that in touch.
It's something. Thank you, Rich. Sylvia, you obviously what you're covering with the condo developments, that's going to continue to sort of be a hairier and hairier situation for a lot of these developers as they're trying to get their refinancing and they're trying to hit their thresholds. You had a story about the Saruzi development and that they've only sold 2 units in their Upper East Side development. Tell us about that story and how that came to be.
Yeah, well, hi everyone. That story came across my radar through a tip originally, quite a vague tip, just that the condo was in trouble. I had been looking into it a little bit before the pandemic because it had only 1 unit recorded as being in contract, and I write a lot about residential new developments, and the market has been in trouble for a couple of years now. So I sort of did a bit of digging around, and what I learned was that the developer, Saruzi Properties, had been in talks before the pandemic about getting an inventory loan. They'd been on the hunt for an inventory loan for this condo for a while, right, and had been working with JLL to get one. And in fact, they had a deal that was near closing with Slate Property Group, but when the state shut down, that deal fell apart. Art Hooper, who is the president of Saruzi, said that it's on pause. Mm-hmm. But I think when you asked at the beginning why these stories matter, I think this one kind of shows that a lot of these developments that are looking for financial relief, in this case, the inventory loan would replace their existing construction loan, which is a rather expensive one. But that deal fell apart, and I'm sure that there's a lot of that playing out right now in the condo market because lenders are more cautious and the cost of money has gone up. It's more expensive now to get an inventory.
And then the way they underwrote it, right? So the way they underwrote it, do those numbers make sense in today's market? Or as a lender, I would think it's very risky to come in right now and lend. Personally, if I was a lender, but I'm sure that's what's going through their head as well. And do you foresee a lot more of these sort of stories coming out?
Yeah, well, I think the difficulty is that there was a period when the condo market was really strong. And so a lot of these developments were conceived in a completely different time, And, back then you could fetch some pretty good prices, but then when they launched sales much later on, the market's a totally different place and what you can get for those units is lower. So add the pandemic into that and developers are forced to cut prices even more. Mm-hmm. They've got land that they acquired for a lot of money and a lot of debt on these projects. So I think that it's a bit of a perfect storm. And I expect that I'll be covering a lot more of these types of stories about individual condo projects that are in trouble or, in distress, and also broader pieces about what that means for the market, because it's a really significant time, obviously, across the whole industry. But in my particular area of coverage, the pandemic hit an already weak market and has put developers in a very tough spot.
Yeah, timing is such a key thing. And I remember talking to a very active and a big developer, and I said, how do you time the cycle? How do you know when to build these? Because sometimes it takes, from 3 to 5 years for these developments to come out, and the world can change in a day. So, and he said the way you time it is that you never stop developing. He was like, you're always assembling, you're always looking for money, you're always building, you're always selling. He was like, that's how you time it.
That's interesting.
And that the fact is that he happens to be a very successful condo developer, and it seems to have worked for him so far. And you also did another really great story, and I always love these Airbnb stories because it's these new concepts that sort of upend entire markets are always very interesting to me. So what happened with Airbnb this week that was very significant for Airbnb hosts in New York City specifically?
Right. Well, this was a dispute that goes back to 2018. There was a host named Stanley Carroll, or Skip Carroll as he goes by, who lives in Brooklyn, and he would rent out the basement unit in his home to Airbnb guests from time to time. He was visited by some agents from the Mayor's Office of Special Enforcement, which is basically tasked with cracking down on short-term rentals. It has a few other things that it does too, but that takes up most of its time. And they fined him for several infractions, one of them being illegal occupancy. So he had people staying in the property, and he disputed these fines and went through the process, which at first instance is just disputing it to the agency, so in this case the DOB, and then went through the channels and eventually launched a lawsuit in state court, which I should say was funded by Airbnb. So they're not a direct party, but they funded the suit.
Was it obvious that they funded it? Were they open about it, or were they just Peter Thiel sort of a?
No, they were open about it. I mean, they were and they are they put a lot of money into these host-driven causes, which you could view generously or cynically, depending on who you are. I mean, they put money into campaigns opposing regulatory restrictions and things like that. So in this case,
I totally understand. But like once people start funding lawsuits, what happened with Gawker left a really bad taste in my mouth after it came out that the Thiel sort of supported that. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I hear you. That was a pretty chilling one.
Yeah.
But so he took the dispute to court, and this week, or I should say, actually, it was at the end of last week, I believe, a judge found in his favor, and so the judge basically said to the city, you have to pay this guy back these $4,000 in fines. But he also made a point that's a little bit more overarching and makes the case more significant, which is, he said, owners of 1 and 2 family homes are able to rent their homes in this manner. So they're able to do short-term rentals.
Okay.
And that was kind of significant because even though the state restrictions or the city restrictions on short-term rentals don't actually technically apply to 1 and 2 family homes, right? They apply to apartment buildings, say. It's a bit different, but the Office of Special Enforcement has been fining a lot of these 1 and 2 family homeowners, and there's data to support that.
Right.
And there's a number of reasons for that, and we don't need to get into it, but this judge's comments kind of gave me pause because it made me think, will this change the way the Office of Special Enforcement goes after 1 and 2 family homeowners? Like, will they pull back now? Right. Or who knows, because of course this will be appealed and there's a long way to go. I don't want to say.
It also seems like a real waste of an effort for the city to put those resources and go after 1 to 2 family, people. Like it's not a development where they're like competing with hotels and trying to, make do with short-term rentals. So it just seemed like a waste of resources to go after somebody in Brooklyn or Queens or wherever they have 1 or 2 units, and try to.
Yeah, well, I suppose I should say, in the interest of balance, de Blasio has always said that he wants to go after illegal hotels, that 1 and 2 family homeowners aren't their target, right? Mm. And they're not being targeted under the short-term rental restrictions, but they're being targeted for code violations. So it's a bit technical and complicated, but it all sort of gets wound up together. And because they're being visited by agents from this agency, which is about short-term rental, right. Overview, it's a bit murky as to.
I just feel like when the government or the prosecutors get technical, it's because they're really trying to make some point. It's not because of some.
I think lawyers are pretty technical by nature, so
Well, thank you so much for that. That was great. I've been looking forward to the follow-up on that. Thank you, Sylvia. Katie, you did the story on Twitter telling all their employees to stay home for the rest of the year or for permanently. They don't have to come to the office if they don't want to. How did that come to be? And, what is that a trend you're seeing?
Yeah. So, we've heard about other companies saying, at least through the end of this year, September, you can continue working from home, expect to work from home. But this was the first that we know of major tech company that has, sizable office spaces that has come out and said, if you feel like working home for the rest of, forever, you can do so. Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, had emailed employees giving them that news. And, the employees have been working from home since the pandemic started.
Yeah.
But this is a new step.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, all of a sudden you have companies like this where they're setting the trend. And, I feel like other CEOs who sort of look up to these tech companies that, are big and they have such influence. And when they see trends like that happening with those guys, they're like, hey, maybe that's something we can do as well. I mean, I can tell you as somebody who has his own business, I look to these guys and I'm like, man, if they can do it, is that something that's possible for us? Obviously, I hope it's not, because I like going to the office. But it's interesting. And it's a trend that you're really seeing pop up. You're seeing commercial landlords being really scared of what's to come, because even if it affects the market, look, not everybody's going to work from home forever, but even if it affects the market by 10, 15%, you're talking about 10, 15% of vacancy in the city on top of all the other vacancy that's going on. What would that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you're right in that the fear that this is going to become more commonplace as a trend. I think it's a little too early to say, everyone's going to start doing this, just because, a few months from now, we might all have a different outlook on what working in an office should look like. Right. So I think it's still too early to say like this is going to, catch on like wildfire. But I mean, it is something that people have to really keep in mind, especially, when you think about the office market.
Well, there was this, we saw that Facebook and Google and I think AT&T, they all said people can work from home until 2021. Those are significant companies with a lot of employees, and that leaves a lot of empty office space. But luckily, these guys have guarantees and stuff, so the landlords continue to get paid with, for those spaces. But what will it mean afterwards? Like as people's attitude about working from the office changes, it'll be interesting to see. And I'm just curious to see what happens with those spaces. What will they be used for? I teach a class at Columbia, and that was a theory that we threw out there, and somebody came up with city farms. And they were saying how much more efficient farming in a building is than doing it outside. 1 square feet of a commercial space can produce 23 pounds of lettuce. And that's far higher than what if you did it in Iowa or somewhere else. And you also did another really great story that was, one of our most popular stories for the week, and that was on the construction guidelines that the governor sent down. Well, tell us about that.
Yeah. So yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, the state had released basically some recommendations, but also some rules for construction sites that are going to start reopening. I believe in 5 regions of the state today, construction sites were allowed to reopen, not in New York City, but these rules will apply to New York City once those sites reopen as well. And these are the non-essential sites that haven't been able to have work done.
What's considered non-essential? Is a condo development non-essential, even if you have to get the place built?
It really depends, because there's, developers can actually apply to the Department of Buildings to have their projects qualify as essential, even if they don't fall into like the different buckets of like affordable housing, emergency construction, infrastructure. So we've seen a lot of approved projects, actually thousands of approved projects that didn't necessarily fall into those categories. So some condo buildings do count based on that.
I found that interesting, because when they did stop all construction, I saw people working on condo developments, and I was like, how is that an essential building? Anyways, well, thank you so much for that, Katie, and I look forward to the next story you have following up with that. I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in today. And again, if you find value in what we provide and the sort of news that we put out, please go and subscribe for our paywall. And have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.